Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, E-Steam The Sands of Time. It's action and adventure in ancient Egypt in this terrific teen time travel romance. Get your copy of E-Steam The Sands of Time at your favorite online bookseller today. Historical couples in crisis. One of my viewers, Kesak Ma Kapuru, wanted me to do a special installment of the Historical Couples in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Historical Couples in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti. Now, the first person in this historical couple in crisis I'm going to be talking about is Pharaoh Akhenaten. Now, Pharaoh Akhenaten is a pharaoh who is infamous in ancient Egyptian history because he was the one who wanted to change what gods the Egyptian people worshipped. Now, Pharaoh Akhenaten was originally born Amenhotep IV and was the son of Pharaoh Amenhotep and his wife Tia. Now, Pharaoh Akhenaten almost didn't become pharaoh because Crown Prince Thutmose was supposed to become the next pharaoh. However, Thutmose wound up passing away, and Amenhotep IV wound up becoming the next one to take the line of succession. And as he took the line of succession, after Amenhotep III wound up passing away, he took Nefertiti to become his wife, and that's when Amenhotep IV wound up on the road to becoming a man in crisis. Now, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV ruled Egypt for 5 years before deciding to change the entire direction of the country's religion. Now, what happened with Amenhotep IV was he started to see that he didn't want to worship the pantheon of Heliopolitan gods. No, what he wanted to do was take Egypt in a direction from being polytheist to becoming monotheist. And what he wanted to do was have people of Egypt worshiping one god known as the Aten, and this Aten was basically a god that he said was the sun, which was represented by the disk that was on the top of the crowns of gods like Isis and Ra. And what he wanted people to do was start worshiping this sun disk known as the Aten, and that really caused a lot of controversy in ancient Egypt, where people were used to worshiping all of the gods and looking to serve all of the gods, because there were lots of priests and priestesses who worked in the temples, and they were used to following the traditions of the gods. But we had Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, who had now changed his name to Akhenaten, and as he had changed his name to Akhenaten, he decided to decree that he was going to change the religion of ancient Egypt to monotheism and have everybody worshiping the Aten. Now, as he did this, he decreed that all of the original texts as related to papyri with regarding instructions from the gods be destroyed, and he also demanded that the whole capital of ancient Egypt wind up being changed from Thebes to a new city that he wound up building called Amarna. Now, this new city of Amarna was the place that he established to be his new capital, and in that new capital, he wound up creating a temple for his new god that he was looking to serve, and in that city, also known as Akhenaten or Amarna, is called the horizon of the Aten, which really is the horizon of the sun. And in that city, he planned to have a place for his new one god that he planned to serve. And this new city was going to be the capital of Egypt, and it was going to be the place where everybody was going to see as the center of his Egypt. And that's where the big problem is with Pharaoh Akhenaten that leads to him being a man in crisis, because what Pharaoh Akhenaten was actually doing was classic beta male behavior in looking to live in a rose-colored reality and not look to live in the world with other people. Now, as Pharaoh Akhenaten went on in his reign, he became extremely disconnected and detached from the people, and instead of him looking to serve the people, all he looked to do was serve his ideals and not see the real people or the real issues of the people around him. And this really strained relationships between Egypt and other countries and made it where a lot of allies really didn't get the support that they needed. I mean, I remember watching one documentary where they talked about how one king had contacted Akhenaten, and Akhenaten refused to hear his letters, and he was telling him about a grave issue of crisis, but he couldn't be bothered with it because he was caught up in living in his own world, detached from the real world and the real issues of his borders. And that just showed how he was really not concerned with the needs of his people, because he was caught up in the worship of this one God, this Aten, and caught up in so much in it that he was just detached from the entire world, and he could not hear any of the people in his own outside of his country who were his allies, and he couldn't even hear the people in his own world. I mean, his own countrymen were getting more and more frustrated with him, and that's another typical part of what happens when you put beta males in leadership positions. What happens with beta males is that when they are put in a leadership position, what they do is they don't really listen to anyone, they don't take responsibility for anything, and they tend to be very distant and cold from people. And Akhenaten was all of these things because he was to the point where he had become so aloof and detached that he thought that he was a god and didn't really think about looking to care for the people in his nation. And because he didn't really think about caring for the people in his nation went into a really bad state where it was basically divided, where you had the Egyptian people on one side, and then you had the aristocracy on another. And it was so bad that you even had the priests and other people of these previous temples looking to keep their distance from Akhenaten, and even the royalty and the nobles looking to stay away from him. So his nation was in a really bad place as related to the entire political situation, and it was really in a place that was so bad that Akhenaten basically made it where people really didn't want anything to do with him or have anything to do with his legacy. Now, after Akhenaten's rule, basically, it just went on for, I think, about 13, 14 years, and he did have six children. I mean, he had 6 daughters, and I think he had, after that, he had several other relationships. I don't know, but the whole thing is that he had 6 daughters, and eventually things got so bad between Egypt and the royal family that eventually the world was so rough that it just created a lot of political strife in the royal family and the people of Egypt, because with Akhenaten basically telling people that he wanted everybody to worship his god and not serve the gods, that caused a lot of strain in the relationship between Egypt and the people, and it further caused a lot of strain between Akhenaten and the royal class of the nobles and all of those others who were a part of maintaining the kingdoms order. And eventually what happened was, around the last couple of years of Akhenaten's reign, he wound up alienating people to the point where, after he wound up dying, he wound up becoming a pharaoh that people quickly wanted to forget all about. And efforts were made to basically erase Akhenaten from history in order to make the legacy of Egypt smooth, because he tried to make his smooth world with no conflicts, problems, or obstacles as related to worshiping his God. But when he did this, he wound up alienating the people to the point where they didn't want to remember him, and efforts were made once he died to basically erase him from history, where they basically wound up destroying everything as related to his legacy. And basically what happened to Egypt is that they moved the capital from the from the city that Akhenaten had established, and took, which was Amarna, or what was called Akhenaten, when the city was moved back to Thebes. And after it was moved back to Thebes, what happened was people made efforts to try to go out and make sure that the entire legacy was erased. Soon after Akhenaten died, they starting to look to erase him from the history. And then when his wife Nefertiti wound up passing away, eventually what they did was wind up erasing the entire whole legacy of Akhenaten, which included his religion of Aten. I mean, his entire religion of Aten basically wound up getting erased because people did refuse to worship it, and Egyptians destroyed the temples to the Aten and the entire city, using the building blocks for new construction projects and looking to restore worship of the god Amun or Ra. They looked to go out here and reestablish everything, and Akhenaten basically became a footnote in history until Germans found the city and found the iconic bust of Nefertiti. And all of this, sadly, what happened to Akhenaten was all due to the fact that he did not look to submit to the authority of the men in his time, believed that because he was given power, he did not have to respect the authority of other men, and male authority figures, and did not believe he needed to be a man who, as a leader, needed to respect the men who came before him. And because he did not respect the men who came before him, the men who came after him had little regard for him, and he went from being a man who could have been a legendary pharaoh to winding up becoming a man in crisis. And he wound up becoming a man in crisis because he just was raised, I believe, dysfunctional, and because he didn't understand how things worked as related to the hierarchy of male authority and male authority figures, and understand that as a servant, as a pharaoh, he was a servant of God, not a god in and of himself. He didn't understand this, and what happened to him is he wound up reaping what he sowed, later than what he sowed, greater than what he sowed, because as he had no regard for the gods that his people served, his people had no regard for him. Now, the next person I'm going to be talking about in this historical couple in crisis is Akhenaten's wife, Queen Nefertiti. Now, Queen Nefertiti is known for the iconic bust of her wearing a blue flat-top crown that's featured in the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. And this iconic bust is famous to us, but was infamous to the people of ancient Egypt, because it was back then that Queen Nefertiti was on the road to becoming a woman in crisis. Now, Queen Nefertiti's whole road to becoming queen is one that is shrouded in mystery, and the way she wound up leaving the throne is just as mysterious as well, because most people don't know anything about Queen Nefertiti's past before she married Amenhotep IV, And according to some reports, she is the daughter of I and a woman named Tay. And according to them, they propose that I and Tay are Nefertiti's parents, but there's not much known about her whole history of her family. And because there's not much known outside of her marrying King Amenhotep IV, and they don't even know the dates that they did get married, all they know is that Queen Nefertiti did have 6 daughters with Amenhotep IV, and as they were living as the queen and pharaoh of ancient Egypt, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, decided that he wanted to use his time as the pharaoh to change the worship of the gods of ancient Egypt from polytheism to monotheism. Now, what put Nefertiti on the road to being a woman in crisis was later on in the rule of Akhenaten, because it was during the later rule of Akhenaten that Queen Nefertiti started to have the same mindset that many modern feminists have. Now, back in ancient Egypt, men and women were considered to be equals, and women oftentimes shared power with their husbands. And because women shared power with their husbands, oftentimes the women felt that they had equal say. But with Queen Nefertiti, she basically wanted to have the power, just like her husband, over the people, and she wasn't looking to serve the people the way that Queen Hatshepsut did when she donned a false beard and looked to preserve the kingdom for her son. No, she wanted power for herself, and she was looking to be able to start taking that power away from the kingdoms, pharaohs, and have it for herself, starting out by looking to be a co-ruler with her husband, which is something that is a little out of order, because even with men and women being equal, many of the women in ancient Egypt looked to submit to the authority of the men. But Nefertiti sought to challenge the authority of the men and sought to become a co-ruler under Akhenaten, as they had moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to his new city. And as they were in that new city, this is where Nefertiti decided to change her name to Nefertiti. And as she changed her name to Nefertiti, which is meant to say beautiful is the beauty of Aten, she wanted to be seen as on the same level as the pharaoh. And as she wanted to be seen on the same level as the pharaoh, she was looking to get the power that she coveted from him. And as she was looking to gain the power that she coveted from him, as Pharaoh Amenhotep, who now is known as Akhenaten, wound up in a state where his health was in a state of decline, this is where Nefertiti or Nefertiti, as she is called after those days, what she decided was she was going to use her husband's death as an opportunity to take power, and she was going to use her husband's death as an opportunity to take power, not as a way to provide succession for the next heir, but so that she could continue to have power over ancient Egypt. And as she was looking to do this, she was looking to try to rule the entire kingdom of Egypt as its queen, as Nefertiti, and was looking to be a pharaoh in and of herself. And as she was looking to have a reign as pharaoh in and of herself, this is where the feminist indoctrinated Nefertiti started to look to have the power of a man, look to take the role of a man, and was looking to rule like a man. And as she was looking to try to rule like a man, this is where what happened to Nefertiti, or Nefertiti. Eventually, what happened to her is she went from becoming a pharaoh of her own to winding up fading into obscurity. Now, she might have wound up fading into obscurity because she had alienated many of the nobles who were a part of ancient Egypt. And as she was looking to alienate those nobles, what happened was they were starting to make plans to replace her. And they possibly wound up, as she wound up replacing her, by making her disappear, because after she disappeared, what happened was the next heir, Tutankhamun, wound up becoming the next pharaoh, and nothing was ever heard of Nefertiti again. And like Jimmy Hoffa, people wondered what happened to Nefertiti, and people are wondering if she wound up just disappearing or was she assassinated. There are many theories speculating on what happened to Nefertiti, but what happened to Nefertiti basically was she was a part of a dysfunctional kingdom run by a beta male, and this beta male and his feminist queen basically wound up being erased from history. And they wound up being erased from history because they did not look to respect the authorities of the Egyptian empire. They did not look to respect the traditions of the kingdom. They did not look to respect the values of the kingdom. And because they didn't look to respect those who came before them, those who came with them wanted to forget them, and those who came after them didn't really think about who they were. And if it wasn't, ironically, for Adolf Hitler finding the bust of Nefertiti that we all see as an icon today, Nefertiti basically would have become forgotten in ancient history and would have been just as forgotten as Akhenaten, because both of these individuals, like the beta male, were considered to be aberrations in history. And they were considered to be aberrations in history because people did not want to remember how their dysfunction wound up destroying the culture and traditions of their people. And as people got things back on track, they didn't want to remember those individuals who created their own rose-colored reality, because they didn't want people to be inspired to bring that dysfunction to the next generation. And this is why Nefertiti and Akhenaten wound up becoming forgotten footnotes in history, and they are textbook examples of what can happen historically to a beta male and a feminist indoctrinated woman who covets the power of a man. They wind up with their legacies completely forgotten, completely ignored, and seen as nothing that people want to talk about, because the damage that they do to society is stuff that people don't want remembered, because they don't want history to repeat itself. So what happens with a woman like a Nefertiti? Yes, she's known to be famous today for a bust, but her entire legacy as a queen is completely one that nobody wants to talk about, because the entire attempt to try to erase the gods might wind up with her, again, reaping what she sowed, later than what she sowed, greater than what she sowed, and again, reaping what they sowed, because they wanted to tear down their fathers' and grandfathers' empires and build their own empire. But now their empire is one that is considered to be forgotten and erased from history. And that's what happens when you have a man and a woman who do not want to follow in the leads of those who came before them. They wind up becoming forgotten in history. And with Nefertiti, yes, people know about her bust, but her entire empire was a bust, because she tried to be the man in and rule the kingdom, but the kingdom didn't want to be ruled by her, and she wound up falling into obscurity as yet another historical woman in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about what leads to men becoming dysfunctional and winding up on a road where their life goes nowhere, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers. like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to learn more about how feminists and women are two completely different beings and why feminists wind up on a road where they are struggling in life, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to see me make more videos in the historical Men and Women in Crisis series, the Hollywood Historical Men and Women in Crisis series, or the Historical Couples in Crisis series, you can send a donation to the PayPal or the Cash App for a minimum of $15 by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.